I'm Matt Valley, and welcome to the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. Today's guest is Orlando Wood, the Chief Innovation Officer of System One Group, formerly Brain Juicer. Now, I first met Orlando 10 years ago, I think. 10 years ago.
It was 10 years ago in Orlando.
In Orlando. Fancy that. So we met 10 years ago when I was a member of something called the Marketing Insights Council for the American Marketing Association. We were presiding over the second annual 4 Under 40 Emerging Leader Award, of which Orlando was a recipient. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Yes, it feels a long time ago now, but yes.
It does, but I have to say, with the way that your career has unfolded, you certainly didn't prove us wrong. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me on today. Lovely to see you again to chat.
Yes, absolutely. So a couple of things we're going to get into here today, in addition to the work that he's done at System One Group. Be the Chief Innovation Officer of the most innovative research company is quite a thing. So that's cool. But not enough for Orlando, right? He's written a very successful book on advertising called Lemon, how the advertising brain turns sour, right?
That's right.
And I understand you're working on a sequel to that.
That's right. I'm writing another book at the moment, which is due to come out this October. So it's been a very busy few months for me. So yeah, absolutely excited about that.
Great. Well, welcome to the podcast, Orlando. Super excited.
Thank you.
All right. So now let's start with research. You know, the reason why we're here. So, what kind of brought you into this space? What attracted to you, and why have you stuck around?
Well, it's a very good question, and I suppose I've always been interested in the way people think, and people and communication and psychology, and that's what got me into things. I suppose I'd done my degree, I'd done my master's degree, and I'd done my master's degree in 17th century French literature. So perhaps you might not think that relevant to today's world. But actually, it turns out, because in that master's degree, I traced changes in culture, changes in sort of the way that poetry and drama kind of looked and felt over a period of about 50 years. And funnily enough, that's pretty much what I've been doing recently in the book Lemon, and in the new book I'm going to be bringing out this autumn. And it shows how the creative arts, are a sort of reflect the society of the time in which they're made, and you can track changes, perhaps even predict changes in culture ahead of time by studying them. So anyway, I was doing this research on 17th century French literature. I decided not to go down that academic route and become a lecturer, a professor of French. But instead to get a job in the real world. And I thought, well, marketing's pretty interesting, and it deals with how people think and how you connect with people. And then I thought, well, perhaps market research would be a good way in. And so I joined a small company at the time called Simon Godfrey Associates, and I sort of learnt how to do some pretty statistical quantitative research, and it was all about predicting volume estimates for big brands and how much they were going to sell in coming years. So it was pretty rigorous. And anyway, after a few years there, I moved to what was Brain Juicer, and developed an interest in how people think and feel, and what this might mean for better measurement and different ways of measuring and predicting outcomes for marketing. And that led me to my current role, really, which is looking after innovation, and I suppose thought thought leadership for the company.
Right, right. Okay, great, great. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about specifics of what you have been researching and writing about. But before we get into that, the word on the street is that you're actually quite a good watercolorist. So
Yes. Well,
so
that's
talk about that.
enthusiastic, I would say, Matt. Enthusiastic watercolorist. Yes. Well, your sources are very good. I picked up. I mean, I've always been interested in art, and always enjoyed it. And I picked up watercolors probably about 9 years ago, something like that.
Okay.
And I got into it because, well, I had some time off work, a sabbatical, and I was on holiday and started painting. And actually, I picked up the work of a brilliant watercolorist called Roland Hilder, who lived in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And he did some wonderful landscapes, very evocative, I mean, English, British landscapes mostly, but seascapes as well. And there was just something about them. I thought, that's really, really wonderful. And it made me want to do it myself. I thought, well, how can it be that difficult? Can we, perhaps I can teach myself. So I did. I started to teach myself and sort of copied his work. You learn by doing, you learn through copying,
Right.
and I learned some of his techniques and how to capture an atmosphere, clouds, shapes, contours, how to give emphasis, sorts of things. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing to immerse yourself in. You sort of completely forget everything else, while you're doing it. So it's a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, I'm interested in, so you said you started copying his work. What
Yeah.
does that entail? Does that entail just by looking and trying to understand how he accomplished something, or?
Yeah, you have it's that, but it's also luckily for me, he wrote a few books on how you approach painting in watercolor.
Okay.
And I don't know if anyone is a watercolorist who's listening at the moment, but what you have to, it's not like oils. Watercolors require you to do several washes. So you do a wash, and then you let it dry, and then you have to do another wash, and you let it dry, you do another one, and you build it up and build it up. And that requires, and normally you start with, if you're doing a landscape, you start with what happens in the far distance, because they're the fainter colors, and then you dry, and the sky as well you'll do, and then you'll build forwards in the picture. So you have to plan it, and you have to think carefully about, well, what bits am I going to start with here? And how am I going to build up that sense? How am I going to create a cloud? How do you do that sort of thing? And so it does require a bit of forethought in the planning, but it also requires, I think, sort of sometimes a happy accident, and to persevere with your mistakes, because, you sometimes you do something, oh no, that really doesn't look very good. And sometimes you just got to plow on, and sometimes that can turn into something really quite good. And unexpected. And so, there's persevere is, is what I'd say. Don't give up if you feel you've made a mistake. That's a lesson in all things, not just watercolors. So I think that's, really, really valuable thing. So, but it does require you to sort of know a little bit about what you're doing. So some technique, but also, a good eye to be able to sort of work out how you might construct something.
It strikes me that each, like painting as well as writing and researching, they're all pretty intensive disciplines, right?
Yeah.
So you've got all of this, happening in parallel in your head, right? So are there any lessons or parallels that you draw between, let's say, what you're doing on a canvas versus what you do in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, it sort of depends what your day-to-day life or day-to-day profession is. But if you're in a creative profession, or in working in innovation, or an area which doesn't have, I suppose, rigid rules, things to stick to, then I'd say that there are a lot of parallels. I mean, one is, you need to have a sense of lots of things perhaps happening at once and how they might interrelate with each other. You need to have a vague plan, but perhaps not too precise, because the things tend to come together in the end if they're meant to. And so, trying to lay things out in a very linear fashion up front doesn't always work. I mean, it's sort of an engineering mindset, but it doesn't always work when it comes to creating new things, particularly, anything like art or poetry or, music, that sort of thing. So it's good to have a sense of where you might be going, but not necessarily to know the destination, is what I'm trying to say. And then, there are a few other things I'd say as well. It's sort of important to respect spontaneity and, as I said, mistakes that you think are mistakes, but actually might turn into something interesting. And I think it was Leonardo who said that, that you paint, if you're painting something, a mural on the wall, go with the shapes of the plaster and on the wall, because that frees the imagination, or it enables the imagination. It's a step for the imagination to do something. So don't bring your thinking to the thing, let the thing impose itself on you, sort of, in a way. There's quite a lot of that. I think is important. And then I think play, you don't give up, and play, perhaps we try this with that, or that with that. And that idea of playing, I think, is pretty important. You also need to have a sense of the broader picture, but also the detail for any given part. And don't overstress sometimes, don't overstress the detail. Certainly I'm thinking in art here, because the more you work at something and the more detail you put into everything can actually reduce the life and the vitality in the thing. So you're actually stripping it of its movement and its life if you do that. So you need to think broad picture as well as the detail, how much detail you want to give to any given part. And I think the other thing I'd say is just don't be afraid to try it, to do it, because you can always do another if this one doesn't work. And don't be fearful of trying something. I think that's a really important lesson. So I mean, there are a few thoughts on, I suppose, art and creativity in general, I think.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So speaking of creativity, I'm thinking of the advertising world now. Right?
Yeah.
So Lemon is about advertising, and would love for you to share a bit about, first of all, what inspired you to write the book, and then maybe some top line lessons that people.
Absolutely. Well, here is the book, Lemon, and what inspired me was actually this book here by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, a very big, thick book, The Divided Brain in the Making of the Western World. I mean, I'd been working in advertising research for a while before this, and I'd noticed that advertising was changing in style, that we were getting far fewer characters, recurring characters, sorts of thing. I mean, the Geico Gecko still exists, but it's a rare breed. That kind of character, and people in advertising just seem to be disappearing. And I thought, why is this? I can't really explain this. And I came across the work of Ian McGilchrist, and he's a psychiatrist, a neuropsychologist, and he's written a book about how the brain attends to the world and the different modes of attention that we bring to bear on anything it is that we're doing. And sort of since the 60s and 70s, brain lateralization, the study of the left and the right hemispheres, has been it sort of became very popular and was therefore had a stigma attached to it in professional, study of the brain and the two halves of the brain. And so it was, largely dismissed. There's no difference between the left and the right hemisphere. They're all in, it's not something worth studying. But McGilchrist persevered, and he did study it for many, many years. And what he found is really extraordinary, and that's that it's not that the left and the right brain do different things, it's that they do things differently. They have different takes on the world, different priorities, different modes of attention that they bring to bear on the world. So the left brain is very narrow and goal orientated in its attention, and it tends to break things up into smaller parts, into ever finer detail, to abstract things from their context. And it thinks of things in very linear terms, sort of black and white terms. Things are either right or wrong, sort of very binary in its way of thinking. And it has no real understanding of lived time. It sort of breaks things down into snapshots, into moments, into atomized kind of, like pictures, if you like. And it flattens things too, so it can't really see things in depth or in perspective. And it has no real sense of music other than very basic rhythm. Now, the right brain has a very broad and vigilant sort of attention that it brings to bear on the world, and sustained attention. And it sort of makes sure that, we don't become someone else's lunch. It's sort of broad and vigilant. Whereas the left brain is that sort of narrow, goal orientated. It's like in birds when they're pecking around for grain, or grubs. That's the left hemisphere in action. The right hemisphere will be making sure they don't get eaten themselves. And so that broad, vigilant attention, which is also associated with social bonding and understanding, grounding us in the world, really, making sure that we are, at one with the world and understand what's going on around us and the people around us as well. So that is the right brain that gives us our sense of lived time, that gives us our appreciation of music, of depth, of ambiguity. That means that we can understand that two contradictory thoughts might be true at the same time, which means that we can understand humor and metaphor, all of these really important things. And what Ian McGilchrist argues very convincingly is that at certain times in history, we become a bit left brain dominant. And so everything becomes quite narrow, goal orientated, attention narrows, that we become very literal, very linear in our thinking styles. Of all the emotions, it's only anger that lateralizes to the left brain. The left brain likes to control and manipulate the world. And you end up in a sort of a brittle period, where a fearful period, actually. And so what I did in Lemon was that I looked at advertising styles through this lens. There are certain features in advertising which you can pinpoint as being in nature more left-brained or right-brained. So words on the screen telling you what to think and do, which you see quite a lot today. The emphasis on the word is very much like the emphasis on the word in Reformation art, but you get this sort of directness and literalness, and the breaking up of advertising into short, sharp cuts. So there's not a scene played out in live time, but just lots of little short, sharp cuts. Highly rhythmic advertising. These sorts of things, and a move away from characters interacting with each other in a defined place. And I showed in Lemon that in the last 15 years, in the period in which advertising effectiveness has fallen, according to Peter Field and other Lesbinet and other commentators, that we've seen a massive swing in creative style towards this very literal, rhythmic, word-based, mechanistic advertising. which, would favor the way that the left brain thinks about the world and the left brain approaches the world. And we moved away from all the things that the right brain cherishes and actually that are important for capturing people's attention and holding that attention, and important for eliciting an emotional response, and important, therefore, for driving lasting business effects. So we've gone very short term, which fits also with the left brain's rather impetuous thinking style. And there are good reasons why this might have happened. And in this technological age, which ushers in new habits of thinking, which are quite engineering focused, that are quite linear, that help us to get a job done, but perhaps introduce a different kind of creativity that's perhaps more about iterative, sort of improvements rather than big leaps of creativity that involve people and the way that they connect with each other. So that was the premise of Lemon, that we'd seen this shift in advertising style, that it wasn't helpful for effectiveness, and that could be traced to the way that we're all thinking. And I'm going to be following this up in a new publication this October, where I talk more about that, and how it's, that other features of advertising have come to the fore, and how we need to be careful, because there's a kind of rigidity that's entered into advertising that and into the world generally, that we need to be careful of, and we need to think of ways in which we can reintroduce movement and life and love, actually, into everything that we do.
Great. Excellent. So you said October for the follow-up.
Yes. That's the plan. So with the IPA, who are the publishers, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, yes, it's going into design at the moment. So exciting times.
Great. Well, you have been a thought leader, certainly in the broader industry for some time, and so you've shared the book that was part of the inspiration for the one that you recently wrote. But I'm sure people would like to know what some of the other sources are that you turn to, either for personal enjoyment or for professional inspiration. So it could be any kind of media, so books or podcasts, blogs. What are you looking into?
It's a good question, and it's one that it sort of depends what I'm working on at the moment. And you sort of get a hunch for something, and you look at what other people are referencing and think, well, that might be interesting. Perhaps I'll have a look at that. And there is a creative phase when you have your mind open, to all inputs. And then in the end, your head is spinning, because you can sort of see lots of different things and where this thing might go. But there are lots of psychologists I've been very influenced by. Ian McGilchrist is the latest. He and there's another psychologist called Louis Sass, who I've been looking at recently. But also, of course, all the ones we know: Daniel Kahneman, Gert Gigerenzer, the work of Antonio Damasio. I mean, there are lots of psychologists who are important. Dan Ariely, of course. I've also been recently drawing on other things, not just psychology, because while psychology is very interesting and very important, I think you also have to look to other styles of thinking as well. So the history of art, for instance, I've been looking at recently the brilliant 1960s series made by Kenneth Clark in the UK, who's very popular in the US as well, called a series called Civilization. And it's sort of a long series of episodes looking at art and how it changes in different periods. And that's what's in both Lemon and this latest book I've been writing, is looking at art and how you can see in art changes in style, and how things might become more abstract, or more focused on the word than the image, or they lose their depth, you know, the way when you really look at something, it can give you a sense of what's happening around today. And I think there's a great quote by Ruskin, who said something like, civilizations leave behind them a book of their words, a book of their deeds, and a book of their art. And the only faithful, truthful one of these is the last, the book of their art.
Yeah.
Because that tells you, it gives you a much better sense of what's going on than someone's narrative. And I think there's something in that. And so that's, so I've been looking back at art history quite a lot to help us to understand what's going on today, because I think you can see similar patterns in the images around us today that you could at other times in history, and that might actually give us a sense of what could come next, and how and whether we want that. So Kenneth Clark, I'd urge anyone to look at Kenneth Clark's Civilization. It's of its time, but it's still extremely helpful. And I look at, I suppose you just sort of get a scent for things, where does that lead me, and where could that take me? And that's interesting. Let's have a look at that. So if anyone was interested, I would certainly recommend The Master and His Emissary. If you haven't read it, do. I mean, I found it life-changing. It helped to understand people around me, history, what was happening in the world. I mean, I thought it was magnificent, still do. And there is also a channel, McGilchrist, that you can sign up to if you're interested in knowing more, where he talks quite a lot and gives answers questions and that kind of thing. So a very useful resource. I also think, I mean, there are various marketing related things that I'm interested in. So I follow my colleague John Evans has another podcast. I don't know if you might mind me mentioning another podcast
Sure.
called the Uncensored CMO, where he talks to sort of senior marketing and advertising people, and particularly if they're launching books or listening to or bringing something out or talking about something. So he gets some very big names on there talking about that. I think that's a very helpful source of keeping up to date with what's going on at the moment. And I think there are various advertising things that I think are interesting. There's a thing called Dave Dye's Stuff from the Loft, which I've looked at a lot. And he interviews people in advertising who worked in advertising for many years. Mm-hmm. And it gives you a sense of the craft skills that are needed in advertising, and how people used to think about things, and how and just what's important really in connecting with audiences. So I think that's been terrific too. So I mean, there are lots of I have lots of books here on. I'm glad you can't see them arranged on the floor behind me, which have been very helpful. But I think that's and actually one of them recently, perhaps one of the most enlightening ones, if I can find it. I've probably hidden it away. I had a tidy up here this morning, but if I could see it, you might be you might be interested in it. Bear with me just a second. Here we go. I think Chuck Jones's autobiography, Chuck Amuck.
I like
so
it.
the Looney Tunes, the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes are just an absolutely fascinating, entertaining, brilliant read, because he talks about ways of working which are so different from anything that most of us do in a traditional job.
Right.
That don't, a very non-linear way of thinking, and a sort of slightly irreverent way of thinking as well, that gets you to funny, entertaining characters, and just the importance of characters, and how that their uniqueness is what gives them their believability. One of the many things he says. So yeah, sorry, that was a rambling answer, but
no, it's
lots of sources, for philosophy too. I think I've been looking at the work of Henri Bergson, who talked about humor. That's one of the other things that I talk about in the new book, about how humor has disappeared in culture, but also in advertising. and how can we get it back? You know, and why is it disappearing?
Yeah.
And so I talk quite a lot about that in the new book, and you know, the dangers associated with when humor disappears. Keeps us all flexible, humor, and things can get rather brittle without it.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. So,
Thank you.
great. Well, Orlando, this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, right? So, so we have to get to music. And this is
Yes.
the question. This is a question I really need to know the answer to. So, just going to throw it out
This
there.
is the big one. Okay.
Big one. This is the big one. So, just going to throw it out there. So you're stranded on a desert island, Orlando.
Yeah.
You have 3 records to
Okay,
keep you company
right.
for the rest of your days. What are they?
Well, that's you know, that's really difficult, isn't it? Choosing your pieces. Well, I'm going to say there are 3, but you know, it's really difficult to choose any music, because music's so important to me. I play the piano as well, so I'm going to go for the first one is pretty well. I'm going to for the first one is not rock and roll at all, but it's probably the beginning of modern of Western music in many ways. Is Johann Sebastian Bach's 48 Preludes and Fugues, the Well-Tempered Clavier, which was how I got into the playing the piano in the first place. So that will definitely come with me, and there's all of life's richness in that. I'm going to pick a couple of others. I'm going to pick Getz and Gilberto, which was Stan Getz and Astrid and João Gilberto, and you know, the girl from Ipanema and everything. Just because I think it'd be a lovely thing to lie back and listen to on a desert island. Richness, voices, and I'm going to go for the Beatles' Rubber Soul, because I can reflect on you know, as in the song My Life, and the places and the people I remember. So that's a very nostalgic album for me. So one that I would definitely want to have with me, I think. How does that?
Very nice. Hey, that's perfect. That's perfect. It sounds like you're going to have a nice existence there on the island.
Well, thank you.
Good music to keep you company. So excellent. Well, thanks so much, Orlando. It's been a wonderful chat.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to reconnect. Really looking forward to the book coming out in October. So appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and rock and roll.
Rock and roll.